Hello and welcome to Principles of Macroeconomics. This is Module 4.1D and we're going to be talking about the money creation process as well as the role of banks in the financial system. So what do banks do? Banks take deposits from consumers and they hold on to part of it as reserves and then they lend out the rest. This is what we call the fractional reserve banking system. This is going to be important to remember because when the Federal Reserve is setting the monetary policy, it needs to consider how banks loan out part of their deposits and give that money to borrowers because that is a way that banks essentially create money in our economy. So if the Federal Reserve is expanding the money supply, it needs to account for the money creation process that occurs through the deposit and loans that banks have. So let's look at a bank balance sheet here. As you can see, the deposits for a bank are under the liabilities column. It's considered a liability because the bank owes that money back to the people that deposited it. The bank is going to hold on to a portion of those deposits as reserves. The share of reserves to deposits is called the reserve ratio. Let's assume that the reserve ratio is 10%. So if we deposit $100 into Bank A, the bank is going to hold 10% of those, or $10, as reserves. The remaining amount they're going to loan out. They're going to give $90 worth of loans to borrowers. Now remember, from our last video, borrowers take out loans specifically for the purposes of buying investment goods and services. So they are conducting investment spending. By taking out a loan, the bank is giving the borrower money that they previously did not have to buy a good or service. By doing so, they are creating money. They're putting money into people's hands that previously did not have it. So let's look at this in a series of examples. So we start off with Bank A here. Let's say our friend Lou deposits $100 into Bank A. The reserve ratio is going to be 10%. So Bank A holds on to $10 of that $100 deposit as reserves and loans out $90. It gives $90 to Susan. Susan uses that money to be able to pay for new chairs in her hair salon. She uses that $90 to buy those chairs from, let's say, Bill. Bill then receives that $90 from Susan. He doesn't really care if Susan had that money directly herself, used a loan from the bank, or maybe borrowed it from her family members. As long as Bill gets paid, he doesn't care where the money comes from. So then Bill takes that money and deposits it into his bank. That's going to be Bank B. So now for Bank B, their deposits increase by $90. They hold on to 10% of that, which is $9, and they loan out the remaining $81. Let's say they give a loan to Sam. Sam takes the $81 and he has to buy some new tools for his business. He buys those new tools from Tina, and again, Tina doesn't really care where the money comes from, if it's a loan, if it's money that he already had, or where it originated, as long as she gets paid. So Tina takes that money and gives him tools in exchange for that. And then she deposits that money into her bank, let's say Bank C. So now for Bank C, their deposits rise by $81. They hold on to 10% of that, which is $8.10, and they loan out the remaining $72.90. This creation process, this deposit and loan, continues throughout our entire economy until all of the deposits have been loaned out. So it filters through the entire banking system. What we can see here from these three banks, we see that these banks have created $90 plus $81 plus $72.90, or a total of $243.90, just from these three banks. So why does this matter? Well, it's going to be essential when the Federal Reserve is deciding what to do with monetary policy. When the Fed decides to increase the money supply, essentially what it is doing is that it is giving money to people, and those people are going to deposit that money into the banking system. When they deposit the money into the banking system, that increases the number of deposits and thereby increases the number of reserves and their number of loans that occur. Therefore, the expansion of the money supply is going to be greater than simply the change that the Federal Reserve conducts. In other words, if the Federal Reserve increases the money supply by $100 in the similar example that we just had, Lou is going to deposit that $100 into the banking system, and it's going to filter through the entire system and create much more money than simply that $100. Now, it's important to note that we're not creating new wealth. Those loans need to get paid back. So the banking system is creating money, but not wealth. This process we can calculate through using the money multiplier. And the money multiplier is going to be 1 over the reserve ratio. So if we're looking at the change in the money supply conducted by the Federal Reserve, the total change, once we take into account the money creation process by the banks, is going to account for the money multiplier. So let's use an example here. Again, you can pause the video, try to do it yourself, and then come back so that we can work through it together. So in this scenario, let's assume that the Federal Reserve increases the money supply by $1,000, and the reserve ratio is 12.5%. What's going to be the money multiplier? And by how much is the new money supply going to change? Well, the money multiplier is going to be 1 over the reserve ratio, so 1 over 12.5%, which is equal to 8. To look at the total change in the new money supply, we take the initial increase in the money supply, $1,000, and multiply it by the money multiplier. So $1,000 times 8 is going to give us a new money supply that increases by $8,000. So what have we learned in this segment? We've learned about the banking system, and we've learned about how banks create money. Again, not wealth, but money. By loaning out part of their deposits, they give money to people that previously did not have it for the purpose of buying goods and services. We've seen how this money creation process affects changes in the money supply by when the Federal Reserve wants to change monetary policy. Thank you so much for joining me in Module 4.1D.